Beautiful. Okay.
So good to go? Russell's on the line.
Russell's is on. AT&T, are you with us?
Yes, you are on the conference.
Great. Okay. All yours, Fiona.
Thank you, Jared. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming to the US Embassy today for our Global Coalition monthly press briefing. Welcome also to the press corps on the line in Brussels. I'd like to thank very much our US partners today for hosting the briefing, particularly Jared and David. Thank you very much. Today's briefing will be conducted by Colonel John Dorrian. Colonel John Dorrian is the spokesman for Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve US Central Command. Today's briefing will be on the record. It will be 50 minutes, finishing at approximately 11:20 a.m. Colonel Dorrian will give an update on global coalition efforts to degrade Daesh and then take your questions. Due to the VTC arrangements today, please say your name and outlet before asking Colonel Dorrian a question, and I will help to coordinate the order of questions here in the room. Colonel Dorrian is keen to take as many questions as possible, time allowing. If you're on the telephone line in Brussels, please indicate that you would like to ask a question by telling the operator. And please keep the phone line on mute during the briefing and the Q&A unless you are speaking. We would also appreciate it if you could refrain from taking photographs during the briefing. Thanks for being here today, Colonel Dorrian. Over to you, sir.
All right, well, thanks very much.
Boom.
Okay, please go ahead, Ewan.
Ewan McCaskill, I'm from the Guardian newspaper. One of my colleagues had a story in the Guardian today saying that a lot of ISIS foreign fighters are fleeing, heading to Turkey. And so one, do you have evidence that they're fleeing the caliphate? And B, does this pose a threat to Western Europe if you've got foreign fighters coming back?
Well, certainly any time that ISIS fighters are able to leave the Combined Joint Operations area, that's going to be a threat. I know that many of them are being arrested. They are isolated and they have to move through a significant amount of territory that's controlled by either our ally, Turkey, or our partnered force, the Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria, or Iraqi security forces. So certainly those fighters, if they were to make it back to Europe, would be a threat. That is not something that we would dismiss by any means. That's why there's been such a significant effort to isolate places like Raqqa, to limit the ability of the enemy to depart Syria and move up into Europe. This is an important part of the campaign. We wanted to get that isolation effort underway. Our Syrian Democratic Forces partners have been at it for nearly 6 months. They've liberated 8,000 square kilometers of terrain in the countryside around Raqqa, and that has been very successful. In addition, prior to and even during those operations, Turkey's isolation of their border region, a lot of the work that they have done to stop the enemy from being able to maintain terrain in places like Dabiq, that has also far reduced the ability of the enemy to move up into Europe. But it is certainly a threat. It's something that's worthy of note, and we will continue to work with our partners and our allies to mitigate that threat to the very best extent that we can.
Okay, Frank Gardner, please.
Colonel, thank you. Frank Gardner, BBC security correspondent. If you just turn your attention to the south, are you seeing any evidence of ISIL moving towards Jordan and looking to set up a presence in Jordan, or to, in fact, expand the presence they have got there?
Well, the enemy, anytime they're under pressure, they're going to try to move. So we have partnered forces in southern Syria that we're working with to try to limit their ability to do that. We don't see an extensive number because the terrain, the roads, everything south of Raqqa, it's a very inhospitable area and not one that's very easily moved through. But it's really becoming one of the few alternatives that would be left to the enemy, because they're nearly completely isolated with regard to moving north or west or east because of the efforts of our partnered forces. And then, of course, they've got Syrian regime forces and others to deal with. So there is some ability for them to move some fighters south. We don't see an extensive number of them. And we are addressing that by working with partnered forces in southern Syria to very much limit the ability of the enemy to do that. And of course, we have plenty of eyes in the sky to watch that issue. And if it begins to emerge, of course, we're going to be conducting strikes to put a stop to it.
Yep.
Yes.
Hello, I'm James Andritzopoulos from Greece's daily newspaper Tanea. Just returning to the Guardian story, the Guardian reported that exactly because a large number of foreign fighters are abandoning ISIS, that ISIS is crumbling. Do you share that view, that ISIS is crumbling?
Well, I would say that our partnered forces in Iraq and Syria, they have been relentless in pushing this enemy back and killing this enemy. So certainly they're in a great deal of trouble in both Iraq and Syria. The word choice with regard to whether they're crumbling or not, I think that's that's anyone's choice. But what I would say is, ISIS has been repeatedly unsuccessful for more than 2 years. They've lost well over half of the territory they once controlled. Their propaganda enterprise is much less effective. The allure of the organization as they are rolled up in Mosul, where they declared the caliphate, and as they're isolated in Raqqa, their self-proclaimed capital, they're not experiencing success anywhere. And once our partner forces take back terrain from them, one of the notable things is they have never taken any back from any of our partner forces.
Okay, Dave.
David Willis from The Sun. What are you going to do what can you do about Turkey bombing our allies on the ground, considering Turkey is supposed to be an ally, or is an ally?
Well, we're deeply troubled by this. This is something that's going to be addressed at diplomatic levels, probably well above coalition level, because this is a departure from the norms that you would expect of an ally that's operating against Daesh. And so the strikes that were conducted, harmed forces that are integral to the fight against ISIS. At least 7 Peshmerga were killed. Somewhere on the order of 50 people were killed or wounded in Syria. And that is the Syrian Democratic Forces, a force that has been stalwart in defeating ISIS in Syria. And even after being attacked, they continued their advance against ISIS targets in both Tabqa and north of Raqqa.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Hi. Jonathan Beale from BBC Defence Correspondent. Having just come back from Mosul, it's clear that you're asking the same guys, a few hundred guys from the CTS, from the ERD, and from the federal police to do all the fighting. And there are lots of Iraqi army units that have been trained by the US and Britain and other coalition countries who are standing out of the fight, who are not taking part in the fight, which seems rather strange that you train an Iraqi army and it doesn't engage in the fight in Mosul. Why is that? And then secondly, asking you and I've asked you this before, but having witnessed bombs dropping in Mosul and seeing the shrapnel that's sent flying through the air, and yet only America has admitted to any casualties caused by airstrikes, and no other coalition has admitted to this. Are you frustrated that your allies aren't coughing up to the fact that they are probably injuring civilians and hurting them?
Well, we'll start with the first discussion. The Iraqi Ninth Army Division has actually conducted some very tough fighting in and around Mosul. They have, to the western part of the city, they have further reduced the cordon and blocked the enemy from being able to leave. They encountered a pretty significant number of fighters, and they have sustained some pretty significant casualties over the course of the campaign. They briefed their own casualties, so I can't get deeply into that with you. But they have engaged in some very tough fighting, and what I would say is, as you saw on the east side of Mosul, one of the things that's been very effective against this enemy is when multiple axes of advance are open. So I think you should continue to watch that and just see what happens. I think the Iraqi security forces, including the army, are going to make a lot of progress here in finishing this campaign in the next several weeks. With regard now, refresh my memory on the second question.
Yeah, it's about airstrikes. It's about. I think I've asked you this before, but they are now dropping bombs in heavily built-up urban areas, and I've seen shrapnel flying from airstrikes, and I've seen kids in hospital with injuries from shrapnel wounds that could have come from mortars, could have come from airstrikes, probably came from both. And yet, only the US has admitted to causing any civilian casualties, and none of your partners in the coalition have admitted to that. Is it frustrating for you, as a US airman, to cough up and admit that you may have caused civilian casualties, and none of your allies doing the same?
Well, what I would say to that is these are really national decisions. And President Obama put in place the policy where we are transparent about the civilian casualties that we caused. What we've found is that by being transparent, the intent of that is to increase the credibility of our air campaign. We've discussed the efforts that we have to reduce the possibility of civilian casualties many times. But just for those who are not familiar with that, we use precision-guided munitions exclusively. We certainly are very careful in the selection of munitions that we use, especially in dense urban terrain. So, for example, the Air Force has a small diameter bomb that's 250-pound munition instead of a 500 or a 2,000-pound munition. That reduces collateral damage. Also, precision-guided munition. We coordinate each and every strike with our Iraqi security forces partners. So both the coalition officer and our Iraqi counterpart must agree that the strike should be conducted before we do that. And then, we're just very selective about where we conduct these strikes, using our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. It's more resources and more effort that has ever been done in history. But nevertheless, despite this cutting-edge technology, despite the very robust procedures and the amount of effort, energy, and resources put on the problem, every one of these things has something in common, and that's that these are executed by people, and people are not perfect. And therefore, we're going to do our very best to reduce the possibility of civilian casualties, but people are involved in this, and people are not perfect.
John.
John in the Daily Express. Two questions. Back to Turkey. Did they use precision-guided munitions when they attacked the Peshmerga? And secondly, do you have any estimate as to how many IS fighters are left in Raqqa and in Mosul?
Before I answer that, that was very quiet, so I'm not sure if we're having a technical issue, but
all right.
I think I got the gist of it. You're asking how many fighters are left in Mosul?
And Raqqa.
And Raqqa. Okay. Yeah. In Mosul, we think there are fewer than 1,000. In Raqqa, we think on the order of about 3,000 to 4,000.
Did you want to ask part of
And
your
is
question,
that a
John?
big reduction from, say, 2 years ago? Have you any estimate as to how much their fighting forces reduced?
I don't. I'm afraid I couldn't probably estimate that.
My first question was, back to the Turkey air raid, do you know whether the Turks used precision-guided missiles or bombs against the Kurds? Or was it just general bombs dropped?
Yeah, I don't. I think you have to follow up with the Turkish Air Force in order to get that answered. What I would say is that certainly precision effects were not achieved because Peshmerga fighters were killed, and these fighters have been stalwart in trying to defeat Daesh. And I would also say that the Syrian Democratic Forces have reported that a significant number of their fighters were also attacked, and that there were also civilians present. I don't have an estimate on that number. I think they're still digging through rubble.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Colonel, there were reports of a massive explosion in Damascus airport this morning, and some intelligence sources have told Reuters and other news agencies that it was Israeli airstrikes. Do you know of anything of that sort, and has there been any coordination with the coalition?
There's not any coordination with the coalition, and this brings up a good point. Those strikes didn't have any linkage to fighting ISIS, Daesh, and it's really not a part of our portfolio. So I think you'd have to follow up with our U.S. Central Command if you want a U.S. perspective on that. It's just not in my purview to address that.
Latika.
Colonel Dorrian, Latika Burke from the Sydney Morning Herald. With regards to the foreign fighters, are you capturing any?
I'm sorry, I'm really going to have to ask you to crank it up.
Oh, Shal, sorry. With regards to the foreign fighters, are you capturing any, or are you predominantly killing them in terms of ISIS fighters in Raqqa and Mosul?
It was still kind of tough, but I think you're asking me about foreign fighters in Mosul. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you're capturing any?
Yep. There are a significant number of foreign fighters in Mosul. One of the things that we've seen as a pattern that's completed, or that we've seen repeated throughout the campaign, is that ISIS leaders begin to leave areas that they expect to lose. One of the things they like to do is to leave foreign fighters behind, because foreign fighters have no reluctance whatsoever to treat civilians that are in the area very, very poorly and to use the scorched earth tactics that we've seen before. So what we're seeing now in the city of Mosul is ISIS using things like chemical weapons. They're using brutal control measures. They're persecuting people for trying to leave. These are the types of things that are very easy to do when it's not your neighbors or people that you've grown up with and know very well. We've seen them do things like light a bunch of oil fires in Kayara. That we've seen them light a sulfur plant on the road to Mosul. These are the types of things that are done, and the purpose of those is to just act as a spoiler and try to reduce the possibility that stability and normalcy can return to these areas once ISIS has been driven from them.
Fiona, could you just ask him any of them captured, because I don't think you can hear my question.
Sure. Colonel Dorrian, Latika from the Sydney Morning Herald, just following up. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I've got
good.
Great.
Yes, so she was also asking whether any had been captured or killed. And how many?
Some of them have been captured. I don't have a detailed readout on foreign fighters from each nation. I don't have that kind of data to offer.
Yeah.
What I would say, though, is that the Iraqi security forces have taken control of some of these people. They've worked with some of the coalition partners, if those people are from those countries, to share information and intelligence about that. That's kind of the state of things. I would say, though, that we're not seeing a tremendous number of those because a lot of the foreign fighters are very hardcore, and they came here to die and being accommodated. They're not surrendering. They're fighting to the death.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second. We have a question on the line from Brussels. Please go ahead, Brussels, and please introduce yourself.
Igor, that's you, if you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. It's Igor Chuzovic from Espresso from Serbia. I have a question about the Russian operations in Syria against the ISIS. Are they now focusing on striking Daesh, or are they still helping Assad fight his enemies? And the other question I have is, do you have any numbers on how many civilians are in danger of being used as human shields in Mosul? Thank you.
Well, I can't give you a detailed readout on Russian operations because they're not a part of the coalition. I would say a lot of the strikes that they're conducting are against opposition that are not ISIS, and they're supporting the Assad regime. So that's what we've observed up until now. With regard to the number of civilians that we see being used as human shields, I've seen estimates anywhere from 300,000 to a little bit more than 400,000 that remain in Mosul. So really, any civilian that's left in Mosul, it's best for them to hunker down and stay away from the enemy. There are fewer than 1,000 left, but of course, these are ruthless people, brutal people that have come here to die, and they want to take as many people with them as they can, and that's very unfortunate. It's heartbreaking, and that's why the Iraqi security forces are doing the best they can to advance, and why we're doing the best we can to help them.
Sorry, just at the back.
Musa Al-Maydi. Recently, we have seen that the popular mobilization movement has intervened in Mosul, and they will, I think, they will take over the historic city Al-Hadar. Do you have any comment on that? And secondly, also it's been reported that the U.S. has increased the military assistance to the Lebanese army in Lebanon. Is there any plan to have any military base in Lebanon in the context of fighting ISIS?
Well, I'll take your second question first. We have not. We don't have any information for you from a combined joint task force perspective on future plans to operate with the Lebanese army. I think we'd have to take that one. For response later. The first question, Fiona, I could probably use your help. I could not really hear the first question.
Do you want to just come a bit closer?
Musa, if you want to maybe come closer to the microphone, that would maybe help.
Come down, it's fine.
The question is about the popular mobilization movement, which is known as Hashd al-Sha'bi. They moved on to take over Al-Hadar, the historic city Al-Hadar in Mosul. Do you have any comment on that? And also they announced that they will head to Tal Afar, the city where the Turkish have their own military base.
Yep. Well, what we've seen is that the government of Iraq has assigned the rules for all of their forces. They consider the popular mobilization forces to be part of their security apparatus. That's the main job that they've assigned the popular mobilization forces is to isolate Tal Afar and block egress routes for the enemy so that they're not able to move into Tal Afar or to move away from Iraq and into Syria. They've been very successful in doing that. As far as other reports, I have seen various reports of other actions, but I don't have any update for you. I've seen the announcements that you're speaking of, but I don't have any good details with regard to their progress in doing those things.
Yep, Dave.
Sorry, Dave Willis from the Sun again. We hear a lot about the airstrikes and the significant impact they're having. Would you be able to give any comment on the significance of the role of UK and US coalition special forces in this ongoing military campaign?
Well, this is one of these areas where national policies are probably going to be the order of the day. I could probably give you some detailed discussion on U.S. Special Forces, but I think you'd have to go to the UK Ministry of Defense for any comment about their role.
They said they're cool with you talking about it.
So for the U.S. Special Forces, they have been advising and assisting our partners in both Iraq and Syria. They have worked very closely with the Iraqi Counterterrorism Service for many years. These are some of Iraq's most capable forces, and they are, were originally conceived in order to do raids to capture high-value individuals, and they've been used largely as light infantry throughout the campaign to defeat ISIS. They've been very effective in doing that and maneuvering through very dense urban terrain. They've been very effective and really made a significant impact on the fight against ISIS.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Evdoxia Limperi from the Greek Broadcasting Corporation. You said that about the PKK fighters committing airstrikes, you don't have any evidence for these claims, and you're troubled by that. How are you going to investigate further, if at all? And do you usually investigate these claims?
Well, I think we've made very clear what our position is, and at this point that's at a diplomatic level. And so there will be discussions between the two sides to more deeply understand why this was done, how it was done, and why such poor results were achieved. And then as we continue together, we are allies, have been for a very long time. Hopefully, we can figure out how to get everybody's guns trained back on ISIS and continue the progress that's been made over the last many months. Fiona, if I may, really having a lot of trouble hearing people down toward the other end of the room. So, yeah.
Henry, come forward or shout out. Henry's next.
Come forward. Henry Hallway from the Daily Star. Is the US considering or ruling out any further use of high ordnance weapons such as the mother of all bombs and moving that strategy over into Iraq and Syria?
Well, we're not really going to discuss future plans or future operations with regard to what types of weapons that we would employ in the future. What I would say, though, is that every weapon that we do drop is dropped for intent. And what we try to do is make absolutely sure that we're striking with precision, that the munitions are selected and fused to create the effects that we intend. So, in dense urban terrain, certainly a weapon of that nature wouldn't be appropriate. We're using much smaller weapons and fused properly to make sure that we're creating the effects that we intend to achieve. We've made very good progress in helping the Iraqi security forces. For example, we've destroyed more than 250 vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices in the city of Mosul alone. And if you have ever seen one of these types of vehicles with its, their very elaborate armor plating and the extensive amount of explosives that have been inside them, there's potential when one of those goes off in one of these civilian areas, which ISIS has been very clear that they don't care about the civilians who are around these at all. It creates devastating effects. And so taking 250 of those off the battlefield saves a lot of civilians' lives, and it saves a lot of Iraqi security forces' lives so that they're able to advance, defeat ISIS, and return to normalcy in the city.
So while obviously we're not going to see any of these sorts of weapons used in Raqqa and Mosul, it's not impossible we could see them used elsewhere in the campaign.
Well, it'd be inappropriate for me to speculate about what weapons we may or may not use. I'm just not going to go into that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I know Frank has a follow-up question here, and then we should have time for a couple more after that.
Colonel, just a quick one. I know you said, Frank Gardner here from BBC, I know you said you don't want to go into details about foreign fighters, but I wonder if you could just stand up the story in The Guardian, I think, that a British ISIS fighter has been arrested in Turkey. Is that something that you have on record?
I wouldn't be able to verify it. I've just seen the same report that you have.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Marco hasn't asked a question yet.
I know you indicated you don't have a lot in the way of numbers, but I wondered if you could help to quantify how many ISIS fighters, not just foreign, have been captured over the last 6 months in Iraq, just to give us some context of progress, a different way of measuring progress.
Yeah, I think you'd have to circle back with the Iraqi security forces in order to do that. The coalition doesn't have any detainment function, so we're not detaining these people. These are the Iraqis that are doing that. You'd have to circle up with them in order to get that information.
Okay, Jonathan.
Sorry, Jonathan Beale, BBC Defence Correspondent again. I know the military doesn't like doing timelines, but you have in the past said that you thought that Mosul would be liberated in the spring. I think General Townsend has said 6 months in the past, and it's gone 6 months. You give messages saying that ISIS is crumbling. At the same time, I think you yourself have used the phrase busting, very, very slow progress. I just want to get a sense of how much longer you think it will be to liberate Mosul.
Yeah, it'd be very difficult to estimate that, Jonathan. One of the things that's a fundamental principle of the campaign is we're going to do it however long it takes. The enemy is completely isolated, completely surrounded, and they are not going anywhere. Unfortunately, civilians are stuck in the city and they are suffering. So we're working with the Iraqi security forces to get it done as quickly as we possibly can and with as much precision as we possibly can. But the reason that this is a very difficult fight is because in dense urban terrain like what you see in Mosul, it's a 360-degree 3D battlefield. Every window and every door and every tunnel may be an enemy firing position, and the Iraqi security forces and our very small force of advisors that are with them have to be extraordinarily careful as they advance. And as they go into these more than 200,000 buildings that are in Mosul, they have to be cleared from the tunnels that are below them, through basements, through closets, through every room and every closet, all the way up to rooftop level. They're doing that while civilians are present. And, that in and of itself is very dangerous and difficult because discerning who is a civilian and who is an ISIS fighter is difficult because ISIS has no problem breaking into somebody's home and using it as a firing position. And what we've seen is that as they do that, often they pull civilians into buildings, use it as a firing position in the hopes that we're going to strike that building and create civilian casualties that they'll use for their propaganda. So that's why it's taking quite a bit of time. I won't estimate what the timeline is, but I'll most certainly tell you straight up what the result's going to be. Every single ISIS fighter that's left in Mosul is either going to be killed or they're going to surrender to the Iraqi security forces.
Ben.
Hi, Colonel Ben Farmer from The Telegraph. Have you seen any difference in cooperation with the Russians on deconfliction and things like that since the cruise missile strikes on Assad's airbase?
Well, one of the things that we've seen here recently is that the Russians have come out and said that they want to reaffirm the memorandum of agreement that they have to do deconfliction. We have deconflicted our operations with them throughout the campaign, including after those strikes, because it's just a pragmatic matter of safety for both sides to make sure that as we conduct our operations, there's no unfortunate incident. So it's encouraging that they're validating their intent to continue deconflicting their operations with us. We had been doing that throughout the campaign and intend to do so.
Okay, just time for one or two more, so please go ahead.
Najla Habrir from Sharq Al-Awsat. We've heard reports that U.S. Marines and U.S. Special Forces have been sent to Syria over the past few weeks, maybe to the Top Qaddam and to Minbish to help Syrian allies. My question is, how many U.S. forces are on the ground at the moment? Because we've heard reports of 300 and 1,000 and 1,000, I believe, in standby in Kuwait. And secondly, are there any plans for them to take part in the fighting on the front lines?
Well, we don't really get deeply into detail on the exact number of fighters that we have in Syria. We have sent Marines there with artillery capability. The intent of those capabilities is for them to fire in support of our Syrian partners as they advance. The Marines have a very artillery outfit that is going to create a lot of devastating effects on the enemy as they try to stop our partners from advancing. So that is going to happen. Very pleased to have that additional capability in theater. I didn't quite hear the second question. I apologize.
If there are any plans for U.S. forces to actually take part in the fighting on the front lines this time?
No, the fundamental principle of our campaign remains the same, and that's that we work by, with, and through our partners in both Iraq and Syria. So what that means, we still have a very dangerous situation for our troops. They, at different times, are with our Iraqi and Syrian partners in harm's way. So I don't want to wave away the risk that's out there for our troops. They are working under very dangerous and difficult conditions in some very remote areas against a suicidal and fanatical enemy. But our partners are the ones who are taking the fight to the enemy. It's not our forces' role to lead the advance. They're there to advise and assist and provide their capabilities to our partner forces.
Okay, John, and this will be the last question.
Okay, John Ingham, Daily Express. Two quick questions. First of all, with the Peshmerga who were killed by the Turkish raid, do you know if any of them were trained by British forces? And then secondly, since the cruise missile attacks on the Syrian airbase, is there any evidence of Assad using chemical weapons?
The first question, I'm afraid I don't know the answer. I don't know who trained those Peshmerga forces. With regard to the second question, I'm afraid that is not in my portfolio because it doesn't have anything to do with fighting ISIS. So I think you'd have to follow that one up with my esteemed colleagues at U.S. Central Command.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Colonel Dorrian, for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody that has come along today. We look forward to continuing these briefings with you on a monthly basis. And if there is anything at all that you need to follow up with us in the meantime, please feel free to do so. I'll send out my numbers again.
Yep. Thank you, Colonel. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
very
Colonel
much.
Dorrian.
I hope to do this again.